Come on, man!
Donald J. Love or hate him, he lives rent-free in almost everyone's head in the West. People who hate him call him a variety of shocking names like Orange Hitler, the biggest threat to democracy in America, etc. Whilst everyone agrees that when Trump is in power, it is a symbol for the wider context and state of the world, nobody seems to put it into the wider context of world history. All but one man. Recently, I read a book called Esoteric Trumpism by author Constatin from Hoffmeister, and he's the first person who I've seen to compare the political journey of Trump and the cult following him that he has created to the grand world history theory put forward by Oswald Spengler in his masterpiece, The Decline of the West. In this video, I will discuss Trump and how he relates to Spengler's theory of world history, specifically his theory of the coming age of Caesarism. In Decline of the West, Spengler points out that Western civilization is dying. Spengler argues that all civilizations have a lifespan of about 1,000 or so years, like a living organism, or the seasons. 9 cultures are listed by Spengler: the Egyptian, Babylonian, Indian, Chinese, Greco-Roman or Poland, Mexican, Western or Faustian, Magian or Arabic, which includes the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world, and Russian. Though they have interacted with one another in both space and time, their internal characteristics set them apart. Cultures are organisms, and world history is their collective biography, said Spengler. Spengler asserted that a culture will reach its late stage and turn into a civilization, a petrified body defined by technology, imperialism, and mass society in the modern era. He predicted that this Western civilization would fossilize and begin to fall starting in the 2000s. Spengler asserted that by the year 2000, the Western civilization, due to an exhaustion of creativity, the triumph of money, the death of faith, and the victory of the megalopolis, or world city, the state would become externally large, but internally barren. When this decline happens, it will be counted by 200 years of a phenomenon called Caesarism, named, of course, after the great Roman leader Julius Caesar.
It is astounding how close our time is to the conditions that led to the rise of Julius Caesar in Rome. Rome was being fleeced by a greedy elite called the Optimates, who were monopolizing land with usury and slave labor. These elites were migrating huge volumes of slaves to work the fields for low wages. Does this sound familiar? This drove down the price of labor and ended up pushing native Romans out of work and off their land. The elites would buy up these vacant family farms and move more slaves onto them. These same elites would then give out loans to these broke Romans to help them set up a new life in the city, which would put them into debt slavery. The city of Rome itself swelled up with a huge disgruntled cast of poor veterans, native Romans, and recently migrated slaves. Does this sound familiar? These formed a jaded undercaste, while the elites lived in slave-supported luxury. The Roman soldiers would go abroad and risk their lives conquering territory for Rome in the hope of making it, only to get underpaid. And then they would come back to find their families replaced by slaves from the place they just conquered. Does this sound familiar? Caesar was one of these elites who sided with the native Romans. He was known as a populist. He used the people as a force to push back against the elites and drive through reforms that limited this debt slavery. Through decades of ruthless civil war, he came out the winner, but was infamously assassinated by the elites for subverting their grip on Rome.
The United States is modeled off the Roman Republic, which is why they have a Senate, the Capitol Hill, and similar architecture to ancient Rome and ancient Greece. Julius Caesar, like Donald Trump, was a populist who grew up in a similar time as to what America and the Western world is currently in, as shown from the clip from Uberboyo. He was called by his enemies in the Roman Republic a danger, and how he will be the end of the Republic, which in that respect, they were right. But let us not forget how poorly the people of Rome were treated at the time by these aristocratic senators. According to the historian Tom Holland in his book Rubicon, the gates and roads to the city of Rome were covered in bones of people who had long since starved. Only aristocrats from Rome could vote, not the average people or the non-Roman Italians. Waste filled the streets, and the average everyday person slowly had their lives become worse and worse as the rich aristocrats would only get wealthier by lying around their mansions, eating seafood, holidaying in Naples. The legionnaires, who would go over and risk their lives fighting Rome's many enemies, felt betrayed by the toga-wearing snobs back in the Senate, much like the soldiers of America's many, many Middle Eastern wars. Then along came Caesar, who was beloved by his soldiers. Alongside being a successful politician and public face with the Roman people, the establishment hated him and did everything in their power to stop Caesar from gaining power. However, the harder they would try, the stronger Caesar became, especially as his enemies died off like Crassus. Much like how ever since 2016, the mainstream establishment has universally condemned and mocked Trump and labelled him and his supporters as a fundamental danger to American democracy. While this is highly exaggerated, there is a kernel of truth to these statements. Many neo-Nazis and other far-right figures like Richard Spencer and Nick Fuentes looked up to Trump at the time and thought he would usher in a new age of American greatness, something they've now walked back on. Now, as we all know, he did not, at least in this first term, do these things. But it did take Caesar a few goes to become the man who we all remember him as being, eventually culminating in the Great Roman Civil War, which would end Republican rule over the entirety of Italy all the way up until 1946. Donald Trump's rise to power in 2016 can be seen as emblematic of this shift. His campaign capitalized on public dissatisfaction with the political establishment, which he portrayed as ineffective and corrupt. By positioning himself as an outsider, Trump attracted a significant following among those who felt abandoned by conventional politicians. This mirrors Spengler's theory, wherein leaders like Caesar arise not through democratic consensus, but from a need for authority amidst chaos. Moreover, Spengler suggests that Caesarism arises from a yearning for order in tumultuous times. The past decade has been marked by significant national discord, including protests over racial inequality, debates over immigration, divisive political rhetoric. Trump's approach often emphasizes themes of nationalism and security, appealing to the voters' desire for stability. His slogan, "Make America Great Again," encapsulated a longing for a perceived lost order and reflects Spengler's ideas that people gravitate towards strong personalities who promise a return to greatness. Carl Jung's theories, in particular his notions about the shadow and collective unconsciousness, can also provide a framework for understanding the ascent of Donald Trump. The dark and hidden facets of our personalities that we suppress or deny and project onto other people are symbolized by the shadow. In accordance with Jung, by emulating traits like violence, impulsivity, and a disdain for social norms, Trump's divisive presence on the political scene has tapped into the collective shadow of society. His attraction resides in his capacity to elevate and express these repressed feelings on the public, providing them a voice. Furthermore, according to Jung's theory of the collective unconscious, there exists archetypes and universal symbols that are shared by all people and have a profound emotional impact on them. On the other hand, it is crucial to consider the limitations of Spengler's theory when applied to the contemporary political landscape. While Trump's leadership style aligns with the characteristics of Caesarism, for instance, the United States is not a direct parallel to the ancient empires that Spengler had studied. American institutions, despite their challenges, are structured to resist authoritarianism. The checks and balances inherent in the US government create a framework that complicates any attempt to absolute power. Spengler implied that Caesarism leads to a singular authority dominating all aspects of life. However, the resilience of American democracy, judiciary systems, and civil society can serve as counterweights to such centralization. Additionally, while Trump embodies aspects of Spengler's Caesar, the political landscape has evolved. Following Trump's presidency, movements around accountability and transparency have gained traction, signaling a resistance to the Caesarist model. This highlights a vital aspect of Spengler's theory, the cyclical nature of history. As one form of government rises, so does the reaction against it, suggesting that while Caesarism may manifest, it can also invite counter-movements striving for democratic engagement and reform. I think I will finish by saying that whilst I look up to Caesar, I am not a populist and I am not necessarily a fan of Trump. I'm not even from America. But I do believe that this upcoming 2024 US election has potential to see a radical shift in the American political landscape. When America sneezes, the world catches a cold. And with all this talk about a second American Civil War beginning out of this election, the cold the world would catch in that instance would be unlike anything we have previously seen in the long history of the world. However, the crumbling of America's neoliberal world order and the rule of money, as Spengler would call it, could see a new renaissance amongst the West, a new era start, as Spengler said. Let us keep our heads up high and march forward.
Do not come. Do not come.
I'm gonna come.